My name is Danielle. I'm the reference supervisor here, and we're very happy to have you here for a talk with David Dollenmayer on drowning dogs and pesky pronouns, which, as far as I understand, drowning dogs I'm a little bit more concerned about.
For good reason.
For good reason. This event is part of our One Book, One Hopkinton event, so if you haven't read the book that we are all reading together, there are copies outside that you can pick up. And the book has themes in it of immigration and speaking different languages and translation. So that is part of why we have David here. So without further ado, I'm going to let David explain why he's torturing puppies.
Good. I hope this isn't too informal, but this is the way I always like to teach, sitting on the table. We have some competition tonight. There's a halt meeting at 7 and I think some kind of meeting about the Elmwood School replacement that also starts at 7. So if anybody has to duck out for any of that, you forgive me. So yeah, I thought of giving this talk as part of the library's program on One Book, One Hopkinton, which centers around this novel by Anne Tyler called Digging to America. Has anyone read it or been reading it? Okay, so it involves two families who meet at the Baltimore airport when they're waiting for their adopted daughters to arrive from Korea as infants. And they happen to be on the same flight. And these two families become friends. And the book revolves around really three cultures. One family is straight Protestant American. The other family is Iranian American. And the matriarch of that family has come from Iran as a young woman. And they're both adopting Korean daughters. So it's sort of a mashup of these three cultures. The book that I'm going to be talking about tonight only involves two cultures, but I'm going to be talking about translation, which sort of is inherently and necessarily not a clash of two cultures, but two cultures are always involved. My friend Jeff Green, who translates from Hebrew to English, has very simply defined translation, literary translation, as moving what words stand for from one language to another. So this is an important distinction. Not moving words from one language to another, but what words stand for. I mean, I think you all know that translating something word for word results in just a horrible translation. So you need to translate what words stand for and not words themselves. The example that I'm using is this novel, which is called, as you can see on the handout, Idylle mit ertrinkendem Hund, which means Idle with Drowning Dog. It was written by Michael Kermeyer and published in 2005. And my translation of it, which is called Idle with Drowning Dog, was published in 2016. So a little bit about Michael Kermeyer first. You see his picture here. He was born and he still lives in a town called Hohenems, which is in the far western end of Austria, right near Liechtenstein and right near the Swiss border. And Hohenems, and this becomes important in the story, it lies on the young Rhine River. So the Rhine begins in Austria, it rises in Austria, and it flows into Lake Constance, and that's right where Hohenems is, just before the eastern end of Lake Constance. And then the Rhine flows out of Lake Constance and flows to the north, which always seems counterintuitive, but it flows to the north to where it ends in Holland. So Kernmeyer lives in Hohenems. He was born in 1948. He's married to another writer whose name is Monika Helfer, and this is she. Kernmeyer has written poetry in his vernacular, in the dialect of that part of Austria, but he's also written quite a number of novels. And the Kernmeyers have 4 children who are 4 adult children. And it's important to this book that their daughter Paula, who was also an aspiring writer, died at the age of 23, I think, in a freak hiking accident. She fell off the trail she and a friend sort of slipped and fell off this trail, and the friend just ended up with bruises, but Paula hit her head on a rock and was killed. So that's the background for Kernmeyer himself. So I'm going to just very quickly summarize the action of what happens in this novella. At the beginning of the novella, the narrator, who's a writer, who lives in Hohenems, who has a wife named Monika, and who has a daughter named Paula, who has also died in a freak hiking accident. So the narrator, who's never named, is talking to his editor, whose name is Dr. Beer, and his editor lives and works in Frankfurt, which is a center of the German book trade. And so they're discussing the book that the writer is working on, that the narrator is working on. And the narrator has a very intense professional relationship with his editor. The editor is very exacting, very precise, very critical. So their professional relationship is very intense, but their personal relationship is very distanced. And suddenly, out of the blue, in this telephone conversation, the editor addresses the writer with the intimate pronoun du in German. And the writer is embarrassed and nonplussed and doesn't know what to make of this. And so he's not sure what this means or why this happens. And then the editor makes the additional surprise move of saying, well, why don't I come down to Hohenems for our next meeting? Don't come to Frankfurt, I'll come to Hohenems. And I'll stay with you in your house. And so this is all a surprise to the writer. So, in fact, the editor comes. It happens to be winter, and it's a very severe winter with masses of snow outside, which is not irrelevant to the story. The editor comes to Hohenems. They spend some time together. The writer introduces him to his wife, who is charmed by the editor, and the editor is equally charmed by her. And the editor has told the writer, when I come, you need to know that part of my daily routine is to take a solitary walk every day. I have to do it by myself, and I'll be gone for 1 or 2 hours. The writer says, fine. So on the second day that he's there, the editor goes for his walk. And Hohenems not only is right next to this young Rhine, but it's also the Autobahn happens to run right along the river at the same time. So in order to get to where the editor wants to go on his walk, he takes a pedestrian underpass under the Autobahn. And when he emerges on the other side, there's a dog there, a rather big dog. And this editor fears dogs. He's always been afraid of dogs since he was a child. So he doesn't know what to do because there's no owner in sight. They're in a big open sort of field. And the editor says, don't come near me. I don't want you here. I don't want to have anything to do with you. And the dog is just wagging its tail and comes up to him. And the editor continues to try to, in fact, he's so afraid that there's a chain link fence that runs along the Autobahn, as there often is to keep stray animals from jumping onto a superhighway. And the editor throws his backpack over the fence and climbs over the fence. And he says, "Go away, dog, I don't want you here." And the dog just stands there looking at him, in fact, looking him in the eye and wagging its tail. And so gradually he says, maybe this dog does not mean to harm me. And so he puts his fingers through the chain link fence, and the dog sort of comes up and sniffs them and wags his tail. So finally the editor decides, okay, I don't think this dog is going to hurt me. So he climbs back over the fence and proceeds on his walk with the dog right beside him, always staying on his right side. He starts to play a little dance with the dog. He goes around behind the dog, so the dog's on his left side, the dog just goes back and is on the right side, and stays there for his entire hour or 2 hour walk. At the end of the walk, as he's going back under the underpass, the dog just sits down and watches him go. And he looks back, and he doesn't want to encourage this dog to be with him because he doesn't know what to do with it. But he looks back and he keeps looking back to see if the dog's going to follow him, and the dog is not following him, and it turns its head away, so it's not even looking at him anymore. So he's absolutely enchanted by this encounter with the dog. And so he goes back and he tells the writer and the writer's wife about it, and with great enthusiasm. And when they go to a restaurant that night to have dinner, he tells the owner of the restaurant about it. And so seems like fine. Maybe he'll like dogs now. So the next day, the writer and the editor work together again. And then the next day, the editor says, "Why don't you come with me on my walk today?" And the writer says, "Okay, I will." And they take a different path. And in the meantime, there's this warm wind that blows up from Italy. It's called a föhn in German. And it comes streaming over the Alps and often causes thaws in the winter. And that has started to happen. So the snow is starting to melt, but there's still a lot of snow around, and the surface of ponds and so on are still frozen. So they walk along the old Rhine, and it's called the Old Rhine in German, that part of the Rhine. And then they come to a gravel pit, which has been filled with water. So it's a pond and a gravel pit, and the surface is frozen over, but there are puddles beginning to form on the surface because of the thaw. And my God, there's the dog out on the ice, and the editor is happy, and he says, "Come, dog, come!" And the dog starts running toward him, and sort of the dog's back legs slip on the ice, and he sort of scrambles and breaks through the ice. So, hence the drowning dog. And the two men try to figure out, can we get out there to save him? They try pushing a branch out, so maybe the dog will bite it, but the branch won't reach. And the editor tries to walk out there, but starts to break through the ice and comes back. And finally, the editor says, "We passed two people back there, and I'm going to go run back and see if they have their cell phones with them, because neither man has his cell phone along." And the author says, "Well, why don't I go back? I know those people, and it's your dog." And the editor says, "No, I can't do that." And he runs away. And so the author, the narrator, says, he doesn't know what to do. So gradually he decides he's going to just crawl on his belly out to the dog to try to save it. And the dog grasps his coat sleeve, and they sort of struggle back and forth, and he keeps trying, and the dog is flailing his legs, and he's trying to pull it out of the water, and he's getting colder and colder, and he finally realizes, I'm going to die because the dog's not going to let go of me, and we're both going to break through the ice. And in the very last minute, the fire department arrives, they save the man, the dog is saved, the man is very scratched up because the dog sort of scrambles up out of the water over the prone man. He has big scratches in his neck. So he goes to the hospital for 3 days. When he gets back home, he gets his handwritten letter from the editor saying, for reasons of health, I am no longer able to work with you on this project. And that's the end of the, that's the end of the novella. And what is unsaid at first in the novella, and what is only very gradually revealed in little hints that we get, sort of buried in the middle of paragraphs about something else, is that this narrator and his wife have lost a daughter 2 years before, in a hiking accident. What I see in this work are two thematic strands which are interrelated. And one strand is the distinction between literature and real life. So we have a work here of literature, of fiction, that is so autobiographical that division between literature and what happens in real life is just very permeable. It's almost not there. So that's one strand that goes on. And only very gradually does the reader find out what this underlying tragedy is. The novella is divided into 6 short chapters, and it's not until chapter 4, after little hints have been dropped, that the narrator comes out and explicitly talks about that Powell has died in this accident and that it's happened at all. So the other thematic strand that I see happening here is this distinction between intimacy and distance. So it plays out in several ways in the novella. It's between the editor and the writer. It's between husband and wife who are both trying to deal with this awful thing that's happened. And they do things like they take their daily walks separately from each other, and only on the weekend do they go together and go to visit their daughter's grave. It's the distinction between also man and nature, if one will. So this is the second strand that I see linked with the distinction between literature and real life. So what does all this have to do with pronouns? The first thing is obvious, and we've talked about it a little bit, and we're talking about the second person pronoun here. So English, the second person pronoun in English is you, right? That's all we have. If you're talking to another person, you say you, and it's singular and plural. I'm talking to you all tonight, and I'm talking to Jay. Jay, I'm talking to you. So that's it. That's all we have in English. And I'm sure all of you know that in most languages that I know anything about, especially European languages, and I'm sure Japanese is the same, but in different ways. You have in French, you have tu, the intimate pronoun, you have vous, right, the formal pronoun. In Spanish, you have tú and usted, right? And even here, in Farsi, in Ann Tyler's book, the matriarch of the Iranian family, who's been born in Iran and come to America as a young woman, she's a very elegant woman, always perfectly turned out, wears beautiful clothes, and is very sort of distant. And she's in a shopping center with her son, who was born in America, her son Sami. They're struggling through a crowd of other Iranians shopping for the New Year's parties. She couldn't help asking, who are these people? The children were using the familiar you when speaking to their parents. So in Farsi, apparently, the sociolinguistic code requires children to even use the polite form with their parents. German used to be that way in the 19th century. Children were expected to call their parents Sie, and the parents would call them du. So when do you use du in German? You use it to talk to yourself. You use it to talk to your children and other family members. You use it to talk to intimate friends who you've known for a long time, and you use their. It also involves being able to use their first name. You use it in talking to animals, and you use it in talking to God. It's interesting. We used to have a familiar form in English, thou, right? And it's plural ye. And in fact, there were still remnants of it in the mid-20th century. I grew up in Pittsburgh, and a friend of mine who lived on my street had a mother who was from a Quaker background, and she still called him and his brother thee and thou. But she said you to me. So that familiar pronoun was still there in English, remnants of it even then. So usually this is not a problem for a translator from German into English, because if a character in a novel that I'm translating talks to her children and addresses them as du at the breakfast table, and then goes to the office and addresses her co-workers as sie, it makes no difference to me. It's going to be you in English, and these relationships of intimacy or distance are going to be expressed in another way in English. So it only becomes a problem, as in this novella, when it involves the switch from the formal second person to the intimate second person, right? And that switch, it's a socio-cultural, a socio-linguistic phenomenon in German that just doesn't exist in English. So it's often it presents very rich emotional possibilities in German. When you're switching from calling someone by the formal pronoun to calling them with the intimate pronoun, it's often romantic. It can be embarrassing, as it is in this novel. It can also be humorous. So an example of humorous use is the cartoon that's on your handout, a cartoon from the 1970s by the great German cartoonist Marie Marx, who died about 10 years ago. And we have a sort of a would-be hip professor trying to ingratiate himself with his students, and he says, "Ihr könnt ruhig du zu mir sagen," which means feel free to go ahead and call me du. And of course, their response is, "Okay, und du kannst zu uns sie sagen." Okay, you can use the formal pronoun with us. So it's funny, but it's untranslatable. If you try to translate it into English, you can't do it. But you can explain it, but then it's not funny anymore. Another example is Germans like to make fun of themselves in this regard. So in the 1960s, the German president, Heinrich Lübke, and the president is a sort of a ceremonial position in German. It's the chancellor who has real political power. But Lübke was sort of supposedly pretty dim-witted, and probably was a little dim-witted. But the Germans told a joke in the 1960s that Lübke, on a state visit to England, said to the Queen of England, "You can say you to me." I don't know whether it really happened, probably not. So, I'm going to read, if you will indulge me, I'm going to read some excerpts from the first chapter to show how this develops. And the first excerpt is actually the first page and a half of the novella. So excerpt 1. Dr. Beer edited only 3 of my books. He broke off work on the 4th in view of the state of my health, as he informed me in a handwritten letter. I know better. He felt ashamed in my presence on account of what happened during our last project together, the incident with the dog. It may be that he wouldn't approve of my telling the story here. He was more than just my editor, however. He was my teacher, too, and always insisted that a literary work is worthless if it makes concessions to anything or anyone. Only a few days before the incident in question, he had begun addressing me with a familiar "du." It was the last thing I would have expected. I couldn't even imagine him saying "du" to his own wife, of whose existence, and after all, we had known each other for 8 years, I had no knowledge at the time. I never associated the man with concepts such as wife, girlfriend, lover, or anything having to do with a family. Not even parents figured in my mental image of him. Similarly, categories of the ages of man, such as childhood or youth, resisted being used to describe his life as in any way comparable to, say, mine. The very thought of henceforth calling him Johannes made me uptight and promised to do so forever. Naturally, I avoided it. It was obvious, almost insultingly obvious, that he couldn't get used to calling me by my first name either. Only once did I ever say his first name, when I introduced him to my wife. "Das ist der Johannes," I said. In our Alemannic vernacular, you put the definite article in front of the name, which must have sounded crude to him. That was okay with me. The article "der" clearly increased the distance between his skin and mine, reestablished an order I was satisfied with because it was as reliable as the temperature at the bottom of the sea. So you see him trying to resist having to get into this intimate relationship. Nevertheless, I admit it would have pleased me just once to hear my first name from his lips as an act of reciprocity, an equal sign between his weight and mine. I was never able to rid myself of the feeling that he was testing me in small, covert ways, not necessarily to catch me out in an error, but just to keep tabs on me in a sort of consensual paternalism, quite benevolently, which would make it even worse. No sooner had I spoken his name than I was ashamed I'd done it. He noticed, as if I had beaten him to it and found his weak point before he'd gotten his sights on mine. He turned to Monika and called her, was he trying to prove something? Frau Dollenmayer. So I have to just pause here and say, this is so that in the German version, the narrator never mentions a last name. So, his wife is Monika and his daughter is Paula. His last name, the last name of the author, Dollenmayer, is not mentioned. But in German, he says, instead of Frau Dollenmayer, he says, he turned to Monika, this is the German, he turned to Monika and called her, was he trying to prove something? Bei unserem Familiennamen. He called her with our family name. And I just couldn't figure out a way to translate that into English that sounded colloquial in English, but made it clear what he did. It didn't sound right to say, he called her by our family name. You would never say that in English. So I took the liberty of inserting the name Dollenmayer here when he really obviously was at pains not to use it in the novella. He'd let drop that initial "du" on the telephone by accident, as I soon became convinced. Perhaps when I called him up, there had been someone in the room with whom he was on intimate terms, and my call had burst in on their conversation. I couldn't imagine that was the case, however, for the simple reason that I couldn't imagine him having any close friends, and I was certain he would have allowed only such to call him "du." What seemed more likely was that he had just been reading a book or manuscript with a particularly good passage in which, who knows, maybe two friends were talking, and he was so immersed in that invented world that for a few seconds after he picked up the phone, he was unable to shake off the fictive world's sound and carried it with him in thought into the receiver, and from there right into my ear. Okay, so then the narrator interrupts this description of his phone call in order to go into more detail about his professional relationship with this man who even sort of secretly admires the editor Gordon Lish, who was the editor for, what's his name? What?
Raymond Carver.
Yeah, Raymond Carver. Gordon Lish is supposed to have completely rewritten Raymond Carver's stories. So he talks about that relationship, and then he goes back to describing more about this telephone conversation. Excerpt 2. And then on a telephone, after the pronoun do had slipped out in an unguarded moment, he said, I suggest that in future we address each other in this way. And I need to interrupt here and say, German actually has a verb that means to address somebody as du. And that's the normal way that you would say this. Wir können uns duzen. The verb is duzen. Wir können uns duzen. We can duze each other. That's the normal way to say it. And so, once this guy has let the do slip out, he's in such pains to try not to say it again, that he says, let's address each other in this way. The word itself could not be retracted either by him or by me without causing insult. And yet he had taken such pains not to say the word again in the way he had worded the suggestion. What's more, he went on to propose that instead of me coming to Frankfurt to work on the manuscript, he should come to me in Hohenems, and was promptly shocked at himself. This was transparently clear to me, but by then there was no going back on that either. I guessed that he had failed to adequately assess the consequences of the new situation, i.e. that a do must be followed up with a bit of concrete action, so that it's more than just an option hanging over every further word, like a stalactite about to fall, and now he'd gotten himself into an even more uncomfortable situation. Okay, then the narrator interrupts the description once more to talk about the masses of snow that are outside, which I think only in retrospect can one say those masses of snow in some ways correspond to this deep feeling of grief and depression that the writer and his wife are feeling. Okay, so then he returns to the conversation. I said, when you come, wenn du kommst. I was unable not to not stress the word. Bring along a pair of sturdy shoes for our walks and a warm hat and coat too. I will, he said. Do you like this winter? Do you? I asked in return. Yes, very much, he said. Und du? I don't think I do, actually. So I love translating this part because I could exploit the very accidental fact that English has this verb do that sounds just like do in German. So here they are struggling not to say do, and they're saying it again and again, including in English. But I had to include the German here to make it clear that this when you come is wenn du kommst. He's forced to use the word do. Okay, so that was the first problem here. The first pesky pronoun, and when I had my wife Linda read this first chapter, and she is quite fluent in German, she said there's too much stuff about do and sie. She said American readers are not going to be interested in this problem, and she could be right. I don't know. I mean, I had to count on the fact that people who are going to be reading literature translation know about this choice of second person pronouns. So anyway, so the second problem has to do with third person pronouns. And has to do with the fact that in English we have natural gender. So living beings that are masculine we refer to as he. People, animals, it doesn't matter. Living beings that are female we refer to as she. And everything else we refer to as it, basically. So we have natural gender. German has natural gender too. So it's der Mann, der is the masculine pronoun. Die Frau, die is the feminine pronoun. And das, then German has neuter. So both so der is he, sie is she, and es is it. But the thing is, it's not exactly accurate because all three of those can mean it. And why? Because German has, in addition to natural gender, it has grammatical gender. That is, every single noun in German is either masculine, feminine, or neuter. And it's the same thing in French and Spanish, except French and Spanish only have two genders and German has three. So, der Tisch, die Tür, feminine, das Fenster, neuter. Yeah? And just like every beginning student in German has to learn this distinction between du and sie, every beginning student in German has to learn that you have to refer to a thing with the correct pronoun. Right? So if you say, wo ist der Tisch? Where's the table? You have to say, ist da. Yeah? It's there. Wo ist die Tür? Sie ist da. It's there. Yeah? Wo ist das Fenster? Es ist da. It's there. So this next problem has to do with grammatical versus natural gender. In German and in French, and probably in Spanish too, I'm sure in Spanish, you can valorize grammatical gender in poetry, and when it falls together with natural gender, there's an extra kick to it. So as an example, like this is the first stanza of a poem by Joseph von Eichendorff, a late Romantic poet from the 19th century. Es war, als hätte der Himmel die Erde still geküsst, dass sie im Blütenschimmer von ihm nun träumen müsst. So it was as if the sky, and there's an extra kick here because it also means heaven. It was as if the sky had gently kissed the earth, that she, in a shimmer of blossoms, must needs now think of him, dream of him, right? So, the sky, der Himmel is masculine, die Erde is feminine. So the grammatical gender coincides with natural gender, and so this whole description of a moonlit night is eroticized by this fact. And you can't say it was as if the sky had gently kissed the earth, that it in a shimmer of blossoms must needs now dream of it. But you can say that in German because you have grammatical gender. Okay, it happens that if you're translating this poem into French, the same thing happens. Le ciel is masculine and la terre is feminine, so it works in French too in the same way. It has that extra kick of natural gender coinciding with grammatical. Okay, so how does that apply to this novella? So, like every other noun, the words for animals have grammatical gender. Cats, spiders, snakes, and goats, for instance, are all feminine. Die Katze, die Spinne, die Schlange, die Ziege. And horses, pigs, weasels, and crocodiles are all neuter. Das Pferd, das Schwein, das Wiesel, das Krokodil. Yeah? And tigers, birds, elephants, and dogs, which is important for our topic, are all masculine. Der Tiger, der Vogel, der Elefant, der Hund. One of the hardest things in learning German is memorizing what gender goes with what noun. So here's the problem that confronted me here. Both Dr. Beer and the narrator refer to the dog as because it's der Hund. And that's not, I think, and we have that tendency in English too, at least I do, I think. If I see a dog, I say, come here, boy. I assume it's masculine. And if I see a cat, actually, I make no assumptions about cats. But if I did, I'd probably be all like pretty kitty, a little girl. So it's natural that they refer to this dog as air. But then something happens, and this is excerpt 4 on your page. In the midst of the description of Dr. Bear's encounter with this dog, this sentence is just inserted. It doesn't really have anything to do with anything except it's a description of the scene. And it's separated off into a paragraph of its own. It's just this one sentence paragraph. Dr. Bear is sitting on a bench having the sandwich that he's sharing the sandwiches that he's brought along with his dog. And the dog lies down at his feet. And then you get this sentence. Sah die rosa Geschlechtsteile mit den dunklen Flecken und bemerkte, dass es eine Hündin war. He caught sight of the dog's pink genitalia with their darker blotches and saw that it was a female. So there is a female word for a female dog, and that's Hündin, is the feminine form of der Hund. But it's a dog breeder's term. It's a rare word in German, except among dog breeders. It's the equivalent of bitch in English, but that's a skunk word because bitch is used as a curse word, which is not true of Hündin. So, but there it is. So we find out here, it's a female dog. But then what puzzled me was, as the narration continues, this dog is never referred to as Z. They still both Dr. Bear and the narrator still continue to call it air. And as a native speaker of English, I know if I know that a dog is female, especially if I know its name, or if I can see that it's female, I'll call it she. And I needed to know, and I wasn't sure because I'm not a native speaker of German. I'm close, but I'm not a native speaker. So I didn't know, do Germans do the same thing? Because if they do, then I would need to try to figure out, or even ask the author, why did you continue to call the dog er, when we know now that it's a female dog? So I asked my German friends, what do you do? And they said, they said, if we have a dog that's female, we'll refer to it as Z. And if we know a friend's dog that's female, we'll refer to it as Z. But any other dog that we see, no matter what genital equipment they have, we'll call it er. So Germans don't do what I do in English, right? So I had to decide, okay, from here on in, once I know it's female, if it seemed natural to me to refer to it as she, I did. So when the editor sees his dog out on the ice, he says, "Ja, das ist er. Yeah, that's him." And in my translation, I said, "Yeah, that's her," just because that seems to me the natural thing that you would do in English. So that was the second pronoun problem. And what remains to be talked about, maybe just briefly, is why does Krumeyer call this an idol of the dog? In chapter 4, where it's sort of the underlying tragedy of the novel, of the novella, comes out, and you see here this connection between intimacy and distance and this tragic event. So the writer, the narrator, in chapter 4, after a long description of how he and Monica are trying to deal with this loss, he says, here's a conversation I would have liked to have had with my editor. He doesn't have it, but he would like to have had it. And I can read it from here. And so this whole imaginary conversation with his editor is in italics. And he asked Dr. Beer in his imagination, how can I write about the death of our daughter? Do you want to write about it? Yes, I'd like to. I think I know what the problem is. You're not sure if you want to write literature or just remember. Am I right? I want her to be with me, and I have the hope that she would be nearer if I wrote about her. I'm convinced that's true, but if you write about her, it's literature. And then other considerations come into play, considerations that will rein in your wishes and hopes and may even bend them into something else, because you'll need dramaturgy to make it into a story. So I think what happens in this novella is that it's the dog that provides the dramaturgy. That's the fictional part of this novella. So Kermile really wrote this in order to come to terms with his daughter's death, but he needed to, because he's a fiction writer, he needed to find a way to write about it in an honest way. And so I think that's why it's been identified as a female dog, because in the sort of opposition between nature and man that goes on in the novella, the dog sort of represents, so the dog is the closest, most intimate piece of nature that we have, basically. And so nature somehow reached out and took his daughter, and he was not able to save her. But he was able to save the dog, and it happened to be a female dog, which sort of means that the dog and Paula sort of merge into a kind of reconciliation. I mean, the sadness is still there, but it's an idyll because it's sort of this reconciliation between man and nature. It's a very modern idyll, if you will. Yeah, that's it. Thank you for coming.
Did you know only 34% of children are highly resilient? That means 66% of kids aren't able to cope with and quickly overcome challenges. These findings come from the Cigna Resilience Index, the largest U.S. survey on resilience. Unfortunately, challenges facing children are on the rise. From academics to sports to social pressures, our kids are facing adversity at an alarming rate. For example, social media has changed the way children communicate. This can negatively impact children's confidence and perceptions of themselves. That's why raising a resilient kid is more important than ever. The MRP Project's Raising Resilient Kids program is for parents who want to ensure their child can positively and productively overcome life's obstacles. The series lays the foundation for resilience by arming parents with the tools needed to help kids cope with adversity.
In the 6-week series, we'll highlight the essential role obstacles play in children's development. The facilitators discourage parents from trying to fix problems. Instead, we discuss specific behaviors, thoughts, and actions to help children work through specific situations. We'll provide strategies that can be used to help deal with similar situations in the future. We also spend time during the first couple of sessions discussing ourselves and our own resilience. This is an important aspect to our curriculum, as it is critical for us as parents to be resilient. We can't expect our children to be resilient unless we're modeling resilient behaviors for them. Each class focuses on one topic, and the facilitators provide time for problem solving and group discussions. Participants can support each other, share lessons learned, discuss experiences, and learn from one another.
One of our recent participants said, and I quote, Raising Resilient Kids was a wonderful series that I am so happy I had the opportunity to participate in. Through this series, I gained new strategies to work with my own children through situations that in the past have felt overwhelming to me. I walked away from this series with new language to use with my children and to help guide them through situations they may encounter in everyday life growing up. I am truly grateful for the discussions, encouragement, and guidance that this series provided. I'd encourage any parent to participate in the MRP's Raising Resilient Kids. If you want to sign up, please visit the mrpproject.org/raisingresilientkids.
Solar power is a free gift from the universe. You'll be very surprised at how many programs there are that offer rebates and information for you to save money on your business and your home. You owe it to yourself to find out more information. Go to the website www.mass.gov/solar-information-programs. Many businesses around town are already taking advantage of solar power. Ask your neighbors what they think. You're saving money and you're saving the planet. Life doesn't get more simple than that.
The Sustainable Green Committee is a group of 15 people working hard to help Hopkinton address the serious environmental issues facing us. We develop plans and practical solutions to help save not only our special slice of the planet, but also help save residents, businesses, and municipal organizations money. Double green power. This includes a municipal aggregation plan, so our electricity comes from green supplies, a climate action plan to help us meet the state's net zero carbon emissions target, and so much more. We also provide useful information on green topics. Our website, hopgreen.org, aims to be a one-stop spot for links to some of the best resources out there on solar, EVs, waste reduction, heating, and safe natural resource management. Our social media and email lists help to keep anyone who wants to be informed about everything we're doing, as well as the latest green news. We're always looking for help, so contact us if you'd like to work on this important mission. Thank you.
Did you know only 34% of children are highly resilient? That means 66% of kids aren't able to cope with and quickly overcome challenges. These findings come from the Cigna Resilience Index, the largest U.S. survey on resilience. Unfortunately, challenges facing children are on the rise. From academics to sports to social pressures, our kids are facing adversity at an alarming rate. For example, social media has changed the way children communicate. This can negatively impact children's confidence and perceptions of themselves. That's why raising a resilient kid is more important than ever. The MRP Project's Raising Resilient Kids program is for parents who want to ensure their child can positively and productively overcome life's obstacles. The series lays the foundation for resilience by arming parents with the tools needed to help kids cope with adversity.
In the 6-week series, we'll highlight the essential role obstacles play in children's development. The facilitators discourage parents from trying to fix problems. Instead, we discuss specific behaviors, thoughts, and actions to help children work through specific situations. We'll provide strategies that can be used to help deal with similar situations in the future. We also spend time during the first couple of sessions discussing ourselves and our own resilience. This is an important aspect to our curriculum, as it is critical for us as parents to be resilient. We can't expect our children to be resilient unless we're modeling resilient behaviors for them. Each class focuses on one topic, and the facilitators provide time for problem solving and group discussions. Participants can support each other, share lessons learned, discuss experiences, and learn from one another.
One of our recent participants said, and I quote, "Raising Resilient Kids was a wonderful series that I am so happy I had the opportunity to participate in. Through this series, I gained new strategies to work with my own children through situations that in the past have felt overwhelming to me. I walked away from this series with new language to use with my children and to help guide them through situations they may encounter in everyday life growing up. I am truly grateful for the discussions, encouragement, and guidance that this series provided. I'd encourage any parent to participate in the MRP's Raising Resilient Kids. If you want to sign up, please visit the mrpproject.org/raisingresilientkids.
The Sustainable Green Committee is a group of 15 people working hard to help Hopkinton address the serious environmental issues facing us. We develop plans and practical solutions to help save not only our special slice of the planet, but also help save residents, businesses, and municipal organizations money. Double green power. This includes a municipal aggregation plan, so our electricity comes from green supplies, a climate action plan to help us meet the state's net zero carbon emissions target, and so much more. We also provide useful information on green topics. Our website, hopgreen.org, aims to be a one-stop spot for links to some of the best resources out there on solar, EVs, waste reduction, heating, and safe natural resource management. Our social media and email lists help to keep anyone who wants to be informed about everything we're doing, as well as the latest green news. We're always looking for help, so contact us if you'd like to work on this important mission. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Danielle Cook. I'm the Adult Services Librarian at the Hopkinton Public Library, and I'm here with my colleague Jack Miller, our teen librarian. We're here to invite you to join us for our reading marathon.
For our reading marathon, simply log 26 hours of reading or other activities in minute increments, and then you'll be able to join us from our trip from Hopkinton to Boston, reading the whole way. Visit our website to sign up for a registration link as well as more details.